Every day, 17.8 million Dutch people wake up in a country with 24 million bicycles. They spend more on cycling infrastructure than most nations spend on their entire transportation budget. And somehow, their children ride to school without helmets, weaving through traffic that would terrify parents from other countries. Yet they're 9 times safer than kids anywhere else. This isn't luck, it's engineering. But here's what makes it truly strange. The safest cycling nation on Earth achieved that status by deliberately making life harder for drivers. They didn't just build bike lanes, they declared war on cars. But first, let's address a different issue. In 1971, the Netherlands had a problem that was killing its future. Traffic accidents claimed over 3,300 lives that year, but one number stood out above all others. 500 of the dead were children. Small bodies on streets that had been safe for generations. School routes turned into death traps. Parents walking past white-painted ghost bikes marking where their children had died. The images in newspapers were brutal. A 6-year-old crushed on her way to school. A group of teenagers hit while cycling home. The deaths weren't concentrated in one city or on particularly dangerous roads. They were everywhere. An epidemic of steel and speed versus flesh and bone. Dutch parents erupted. What started as scattered protests became a movement with a name that sent chills through politicians. Stop the kindermoord. Stop the child murder. They weren't being hyperbolic. In their eyes, allowing children to die in preventable accidents was murder by negligence. Then in 1973, the oil crisis hit. Suddenly, the protests had an economic argument to match their moral one. Car-free Sundays, introduced to save fuel, showed cities what they could be without vehicles. The transformation was breathtaking. Within 5 years, the Netherlands completely reversed decades of car-centric planning. But they didn't just build bike lanes. They fundamentally reconsidered what streets were for. Were they throughways for vehicles, or were they places where people lived? The answer would reshape an entire nation. Dutch engineers didn't just want fewer deaths. They wanted 0 deaths, not as an aspiration, but as a design specification. They called it sustainable safety, and it required rethinking everything from the ground up. The fundamental insight was breathtakingly simple. Instead of trying to prevent every crash, design the system so that crashes don't kill. Speed kills. Not driving, but speed itself. So Dutch engineers made slow speeds inevitable anywhere humans and cars might meet. Not through signs or enforcement, but through design. They narrowed streets, added curves, raised crossings, and planted trees close to the road edge. A driver physically cannot go fast enough to kill. It's not traffic calming, it's survival engineering. They introduced the concept of homogeneity, ensuring that everything sharing the same space moves at similar speeds, in similar directions, with similar mass. Where that's impossible, they separate completely. Fast and slow don't mix. Heavy and light don't mix. Protected and exposed don't mix. The most elegant example is the Dutch roundabout. Cars enter at angles that force deceleration. Cyclists have their own raised ring around the outside, with clear sight lines and priority. The geometry makes high-speed impact physically impossible. Even if everyone makes mistakes, and the Dutch assume everyone will, the worst outcome is a bump, not a funeral. But sustainable safety goes deeper than intersection design. Roads are categorized by single functions, through roads for traveling, distributor roads for reaching destinations, and access roads for local traffic. Mixing functions is forbidden. You can't have a road that's both a high-speed route and lined with shops. That's how people die. Choose one function and design exclusively for it. The psychological effect is profound. When streets feel dangerous, people act carefully. But Dutch streets don't feel dangerous. They feel impossible to navigate dangerously. The design speaks louder than any sign. This is a place for people, not for speed. Here's where the Dutch did something truly radical. They inverted the entire transportation hierarchy. In most countries, road design starts with cars and works down. How many lanes do we need? What speed should traffic flow? Then, if there's space left over, maybe add a bike lane or sidewalk. The Dutch flip this completely. Pedestrians come first. then cyclists, then public transport. Private cars come last. The most vulnerable users get the most protection. The most space-efficient modes get the most space. A single car lane can move 2,000 people per hour. A bike lane of the same width moves 14,000. The math is inescapable. So when space is tight, cars lose. You see this hierarchy everywhere. At intersections, pedestrians get the shortest crossing distances. Cyclists get protected corners and advanced green lights. Buses get dedicated lanes and signal priority. Cars get whatever's left. In many city centers, cars are simply banned. Not because the Dutch hate cars, 62% of households own one, but because geometry has priorities. When you design for the most vulnerable first, everyone becomes more careful. Drivers approach intersections expecting pedestrians. Cyclists know they have priority, but also responsibility. The entire system reinforces the same message: human life matters more than speed. In the early 1990s, the Dutch made a legal change that seemed minor, but revolutionized road safety. They introduced strict liability.
An accident happens. In general, the car driver is liable.
For drivers. In any collision between a car and a cyclist, the driver is automatically liable unless they can prove the cyclist deliberately caused the crash or was seriously negligent, not careless, not mistaken, deliberately reckless. This flipped the entire incentive structure. Suddenly, drivers had skin in the game, financial skin. Their insurance would pay out regardless of fault. Their premiums would rise. The burden of proof shifted from the vulnerable to the powerful. Overnight, driver behavior transformed. Not because Dutch drivers became more moral, but because the consequences became unavoidable. The law reflects a simple reality. In a collision between a car and a bike, the car never loses. The cyclist might be wrong, but they're the one in the hospital, so the person wielding the deadly weapon bears the responsibility. It's the same logic that makes gun owners liable for accidental shootings, even if the victim was somewhere they shouldn't be. Critics called it unfair. What if the cyclist ran a red light? What if they swerved unexpectedly? The Dutch response was blunt. Drive like everyone might do something stupid, because someone will. The law doesn't require perfection from cyclists. It requires extreme caution from drivers. And it works. Dutch drivers give cyclists enormous buffer zones, wait patiently at crossings, and check mirrors obsessively before turning. The strict liability law also shapes infrastructure design. Engineers know that drivers will be hyper-cautious around cyclists, so they can design tighter spaces and closer interactions than would be safe elsewhere. It's a feedback loop. Careful driving enables better design, which enforces careful driving. Now we reach the most counterintuitive element of Dutch cycling safety: the complete absence of helmet laws. In America, not wearing a helmet while cycling is considered irresponsible, even negligent. Parents who let their children ride without helmets face judgment, sometimes legal consequences. Yet the Netherlands, with the world's highest cycling rates and youngest riders, doesn't just skip helmet laws, they actively oppose them. The math is shocking but clear. Regular cycling prevents roughly 6,500 Dutch deaths annually through improved cardiovascular health. Studies consistently show that mandatory helmet laws reduce cycling rates by 20 to 40%. Apply that reduction to the Netherlands, and you'd prevent maybe a dozen head injuries while causing over 1,000 additional deaths from heart disease. The helmet law would literally kill people, but it goes deeper than numbers. Helmets fundamentally change the perception of cycling from a normal daily activity to a dangerous sport requiring special equipment. Once cycling seems dangerous, fewer people do it. Fewer cyclists mean less political support for infrastructure, more dangerous streets, and a downward spiral that ends with cycling as a niche activity for the brave or poor. The Dutch prove this daily, with 43% of the population cycling regularly, compared to 4% in the UK. They've normalized biking to the point where it's as mundane as walking. You don't wear a helmet to walk to the store. Why would you wear one to bike there? The infrastructure makes cycling so safe that protective gear becomes irrelevant. There's also a risk compensation effect. Studies show that drivers pass helmeted cyclists more closely, assuming they're protected. Cyclists wearing helmets take more risks, feeling safer than they are. The helmet becomes a dangerous psychological crutch that undermines the very behaviors, caution, awareness, mutual respect, that actually prevent crashes. The Dutch approach isn't anti-helmet. Racing cyclists wear them. Mountain bikers wear them. But for normal transportation cycling on protected infrastructure at reasonable speeds, helmets offer minimal benefit while imposing real costs. The safest cyclist isn't the one in body armor. It's the one on a street designed to make crashes survivable. The Dutch model is spreading, but not always in ways you'd expect. Copenhagen now boasts a 62% cycling rate for commutes, surpassing even Amsterdam. They achieved this by copying Dutch infrastructure wholesale, protected lanes, intersection design, strict liability laws. Then, adding their own innovations like the green wave that lets cyclists ride 20 kilometers without hitting a red light. New York City, seemingly the antithesis of bike-friendly design, has installed hundreds of miles of protected bike lanes using Dutch principles. The results are immediate. Cycling injuries dropped 17% even as ridership doubled. Portland, Minneapolis, and Washington, D.C. show similar patterns. Build Dutch-style infrastructure. Get Dutch-style results. The principles work regardless of culture or climate, yet challenges remain. The Netherlands still sees about 200 cycling deaths annually. For a nation obsessed with cycling safety, that's 200 too many. E-bikes are changing the equation, bringing higher speeds and older riders. Climate change makes infrastructure maintenance harder. Success itself creates problems. Some Amsterdam bike lanes now suffer traffic jams. The deeper question isn't technical, but philosophical. How safe is safe enough? The Dutch have reduced cycling risk to levels that would seem impossible elsewhere, but they keep pushing. New innovations emerge constantly. Bike highways with wind barriers, heated lanes that melt ice, smart traffic lights that predict cyclist behavior. Each incremental improvement costs more and saves fewer lives than the last. Some argue they've reached diminishing returns. The money spent making cycling 1% safer could perhaps save more lives elsewhere. But the Dutch counter that safety isn't just about preventing deaths, it's about enabling life. Every child who rides to school independently, every elderly person who keeps cycling into their 80s, every commuter who arrives at work energized rather than stressed. These benefits don't show up in crash statistics, but they're why the investment continues. In the end, the Dutch didn't solve transportation. They solved a different problem: how to build cities for humans instead of machines. The bikes are just how they get around in the world they chose to create.